Hello, I'm Dhanya Rajendran, the editor-in-chief of the News Minute. Joining me in this session is Pooja Prasanna, my colleague. We both are going to be interviewing the Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu, Mr. PTR, as he's known. So I want to begin with a very serious question. Why do you wear two watches?
That's a difficult question. Actually, no. I think sometime in the late 80s or early 90s, one day my mother found two old watches in a closet. And both were not functioning. And there were two old Rolexes, one from the 1940s or 50s and one from the 1960s. Anyway, I got them repaired when I was in the US. And one of them was my grandfather's and one was my father's. My father's was a manual wind, so I didn't have the patience for it. My grandfather's was an automatic. And so I wore that on my hand for, 20, 30 years to remind me of my grandfather and my legacy. Over the years, I started wearing wristbands, the first Fitbit that came, and then it became my HR Fitbit, and then it became various things. And eventually it morphed to this Apple Watch, which is a phone and a watch and everything. So for sentiment, I kept the Rolex on this hand, and I kept whatever technology changed every year or 2 years, I keep changing the technology on this hand, mostly for fitness and for phone, not for the watch. I don't know if it's coincidence or what, but about a week ago, my Rolex suddenly stopped working. And so with the lockdown, there's nobody to repair it. So I don't know, I was telling my wife, maybe I only needed to have that long enough to come back to politics. Now that I'm here, my ancestors live in me. And I don't need to wear that watch anymore. But I haven't had a chance to get it repaired. So whenever I get it repaired, I'll decide whether to wear it or not.
Because there are many rumors on the internet as to why you wear two watches. In fact, I heard someone saying it's because you like to look at American time and Indian time simultaneously. Why would you want to be doing that? Pooja?
No, there was a time when I was a global head in Stan Charter, when I ran the global offshoring platform, all global markets for Lehman, where I needed to know what time it was in various markets. But right now, I only care about what time it is in Madurai and in Chennai. So I don't need two watches for that.
Pooja, you want to say something before we kick off the questions?
No, I'm hoping for a fun session, given how feisty he is on Twitter. We're hoping he'll bring some of that fire to our session today. I know that he's going to try and address all the questions. The only job Dhanya and I had actually was to decide from that flood of questions that we had, which ones that we could actually accommodate. You are somebody who's gone beyond Tamil Nadu. People from across the country have a lot of things to ask. So I think we'll just get going right away, Dhanya.
Yes. So my first question to you, PTR, is a few days ago, we had a chat about the vaccination policy in which you were telling me that the union government believes in oligarchy, which is the reason why the whole vaccination policy is like this. The very next day, the Prime Minister made a speech in which a major change was brought to the vaccination policy, and the government said that they will be procuring all the vaccines, 75% of the vaccines, and will be giving to the states, 25% to the private sector. How do you see this new vaccination policy? And do you still believe that oligarchy persists?
Yeah, clearly it does. I still don't understand why it's only 75%. I mean, in most national emergencies, national disasters, the law is very clear. When I speak to the Chief Minister's secretaries here, who I've never been in government before, it's the first time for me. So when I ask questions about how we go through various processes, they say, both the Chief Secretary and the Chief Minister's secretaries tell us that under the Disaster Management Act, you can actually waive all conditions of even normal tenders and the normal checks and balances of procurement, because you need to procure, for the national interest. So if you have vaccine manufacturers in the country and you know their capacity, why would you not buy 100% of their production? Why, if there was ever a time for monopoly procurement, that time is now. So I find it hard to believe why we're only doing 75%. So, for example, I had some people vaccinated recently in my team, and they charged 780 rupees per vaccine, 600 rupees for the vaccine at the rate that the seller, with the approval of the union government, set, plus 5% GST of 30, plus 150 service charge. Now, I'm well off, I can afford it, I'm not complaining. But surely the government should have procured 100%, sent it through the state mechanism, and then had, if somehow you couldn't actually inoculate through the government. In Tamil Nadu, for example, we have enough public health infrastructure that nobody should need to go to a private hospital for a vaccine. We can certainly do 100% of vaccinations. In Madurai district alone, we have 75 locations that are primary health centers. If need be, we can create another 50. So nobody should need to go to a private hospital. So there are times when you want to encourage private enterprise. Of course, we want to show investors and industrialists that we encourage healthy kind of profit-seeking driven growth. That's what normal capitalist models do. But to me, this seems like not very rational to me. It seems either both not very compassionate and not very rational. If it were up to me, I would say monopoly procurement, 100% of all production. And if you cannot produce, then I will take over and produce and make sure that we get everybody, inoculated as quickly as possible. And then we go back to private enterprise. And I don't think there's an investment banker or investor or industrialist in the world who would complain against that for this 6-month or 1-year period, including the fact that India is so important to the global economy that you look at the pictures coming out of the G7 summit or in the UK or in the US, people seem to be getting on with their lives without masks and everything. The economy is back. I don't know if you read in the Wall Street Journal how this is the fastest recovery in the history of the US because it's been such an unnatural shutdown. There was no crisis. There was no debt overhang. There was no economic decay. So, when it's so important to vaccinate and inoculate everybody so that you can get back to the economy, I still don't think this is far enough, actually.
But there is this comment which I see a lot of people making, that why can't we give 25% to the private sector? Because there are people in India who can afford to buy that vaccination. Why should they not be allowed to buy?
Yeah, I don't think it's a question of why can they not and why should we not give it to the private sector. This is a concept of public good versus, kind of niche good or luxury good. Just like we say that we should supply water through the corporation to rich and poor people. We don't say, let's supply drinking water only to the poor people and let the rich people find their own water. We build them differently. That's a different story. But we send it through the public distribution system of water. Electricity, we don't say let rich people have only their own generators. We sell electricity through the government board to everybody. This to me is a classic situation where the vaccine should be a public good. If the state, or for that matter, if the union, feels that there should be differential pricing, no problem. You say whoever has the ration card gets it for free. Whoever doesn't have a rice card gets it for 200. Whoever doesn't have any card, these things are secondary. It is the logistics and the procurement and the distribution that worries me. Because now you have a situation where big hospital chains will be able to buy what small cannot, right? If you have only 2 or 3 sellers, if you have an oligopoly, and then you have hundreds or thousands of hospitals trying to bid for this supply, surely either the manufacturers or the wholesalers or the regional dealers or somebody is going to be in a position of power to allocate. And then you're going to create inequality again. These are my concerns.
Prime Minister Modi, has recently said that while announcing, a flip-flop in a vaccination policy, he said that the states were asking for decentralization. When that was done, they went back and they said that this is, too much for us to handle. They bungled up. There was anarchy. Apart from Mamata Banerjee, we haven't heard any other state chief minister come out and ask for decentralization in terms of procurement or even funding for that matter. Are you aware of anything of this sort? Who asked and what kind of decentralization is it that the states were asking for?
Yeah, I think you're confusing 2 different things. I don't think anybody ever said decentralized procurement, right? You'd have to be pretty kind of short of IQ to say when there are only 2 manufacturers or 3 manufacturers in the whole country, to say decentralize and let hundreds or tens of people bid for it and create a lopsided market, that would be pretty inane. What states were asking for is, why should we have a central website where every single vaccination in the whole country should be registered? Why should that require some documentation like an Aadhaar when the Supreme Court has said Aadhaar is not necessary for services? Why should all those vaccination certificates be issued only by the union government? These are not realistic, kind of conditions. You have 1,300,000,000, almost 1,400,000,000 people. Let's say 1 billion or so of those need vaccination, leave out the below 18. Then how does it make sense that there's one website, one server, one logic, one system that all this should be done? That was what most people asked for decentralization in the implementation, in the administration, not in the procurement, right? We're not that silly. When there are only 2 or 3 manufacturers in India, when there's not enough supply in the world, you have a structural problem in the market because it's an oligopoly. Then you have a technical problem in the market because demand supply is out of whack. Under these conditions, which guy will go and say, make it an open buyer market so that we can compete? It's ridiculous. You can't compete. Why would anybody ask for a market where they compete without any kind of strength? Now you tell me it's 50 buyers, then I say it's a different, or 50 sellers, then I say it's a different market. But the confusion, and I don't want to put words into anybody's mouth, but I'm saying, how do you mistake diversify distribution and free up implementation from, how do you confuse that with diversify purchasing? I don't think anybody ever asked for diversify purchasing. It doesn't make sense. There are only that many sellers.
I think the notion has been created that states did ask for procurement. Pooja, go on.
Now, I was just asking a question slightly deviating from the vaccination conversation that we are asking. One thing that stood out since, the DMK came to power on the 7th of May, in all official statements, you have been referring to the union government, particularly as Undri Arasu, as opposed to what was being used before as Madhya Arasu. What was the need for this change particularly? Was it a strategy, or is it something that you did?
Union government and not central government.
Yeah, listen, the Union of India is what every court case reads. The Union of India is what every Gujarat driving license shows. The Union of India is in the Constitution. The Union of India is what Justice Chandrachud referred to when he gave his interim remarks on the vaccination case. So I don't see anything wrong with the use of this is like an unnecessary debate, right? What does it matter what we call it? They are the ones that have all the direct taxation power. They have the bulk of indirect taxation power. They collect even the SGST and distribute it to us. We have backlog in even that. Of course, we need to get along with them. How does it make any sense? I mean, why should the whole logic of anybody's complaining? Some of the kind of what can I say? I don't want to say. Some of the meanest intelligences in Tamil Nadu belong to the BJP IT wing and the BJP kind of social media. And these mean intelligences start off, we must have an NIA investigation for using the word union instead of central. I mean, it's like moronic, right? And this is like the BJP stays at 3-4% vote share in Tamil Nadu, not because there are not enough adherents to their ideals, but because of the quality of their office bearers is so poor that they cannot ever grow. I mean, why? I don't understand why they don't get this. They have the worst human beings running their systems and their technology and their office, and then they say, "Oh, how come we don't grow?" It's not rocket science.
Okay, so now we're going to move to our members. We have Abhay with us. Abhay, you have actually given us 3 questions, but I want you to go ahead and ask the question about GST to Mr. PTR. Abhay, are you there?
Yeah, sorry. Well, I had to put this background because my real background is kind of a little bit of a mess.
Very happy. No problem. Please go ahead with the question on GST. Like too many questions.
Yeah. So my question to you, sir. First of all, it's a great honor to actually interact with you personally, and I thank the News Minute for this. My question to you was, given that the GST is a mess. Let me preface that with my question. It's a complete mess. Now, my question to you is, what would be the different ways from this point of time to actually come out of this mess, number one? And number two, is the solution going to be a political one or a non-political one? And 3, can any solution assure of economic autonomy for a particular state?
PTR, I just want to add another member's question to Abhay's question. Raghavan has asked, what can the state governments do to get more taxation powers from the union government, considering GST is there, especially when petrol, liquor, and real estate are inevitably brought under the GST? So if you can club both these and answer.
Yeah, why don't I answer all together on GST very quickly, 4 or 5 points. I don't see any day that either the union or the states urge the movement of petrol, diesel, and alcohol into GST, at least under the current circumstances. There are multiple reasons why, not least of which is that the whole infrastructure is shaking already. The GST system is not workable in its current form. And the last thing that either the union or the states would want is to bring their biggest revenue sources into the GST. The bigger picture questions that were asked, yes, it is a mess, but I think it's fixable. So in my call it opening statements as a first-time member of the GST Council, I had written a fairly long, statement And I had asked the Honorable Union Finance Minister, I said, I don't want to bore everybody. I want to be sensitive of everybody's time. So can I just submit this and you take it as read into the minutes? And she very graciously agreed, and she took it and she said, the way I will make sure it's taken as read is that I will circulate it to all 31 states. And she did. She took it and she sent it to all 31 states. And I made all these points. I said, here are all the flaws, and from an operational and design perspective, here are all the ambiguities from a constitutional perspective. What is the real authority? Who holds it? How is it exercised? What does consensus mean? What happens? And you got to understand something. The GST Council is an advisory body. Whatever decision we make in the GST Council, the states have to go back and implement amendments to their commercial tax laws, the state commercial tax laws, to implement what the GST Council agreed. The union government has to go and pass that equivalent bill for the IGST and the CGST in the parliament, in both houses. So it's a system that requires everybody to agree to implement things irrespective of whether they like it or not. And it's this consensus, again, without going into too much detail, this meeting that we had yesterday, the follow-up meeting, there was this whole debate about, is it unanimous, is it not unanimous from the group of ministers, and then what that means for the council. And I asked the question, I said, I hope the Honorable Union Finance Minister doesn't imply that consensus means unanimous. Because unanimous, it's like a bit like Orwellian 1984 Big Brother, like we're all in groupthink. Consensus can mean that we agree because of the greater good, or because we understand we're in the minority, but not because our intent is that way. So, for example, yesterday I said, I commend the group of ministers' work. I'm sure that they did it in good faith. I disagree with the outcome. Mathematically, I think it's a few hundred or a couple thousand crores at most. For the Union of India, or for the states, 31 states, to be split for Tamil Nadu, it probably means 3 crores or 5 crores in revenue. I think it is more important to send the message of compassion to the people that we put these at zero than to tax these at 5%. So, but having said that, I realize we're in a minority. So I register my dissent, and then the overall number of states, because of the one state, one vote, they all agree, and it comes out. And she was kind enough, apparently. I had to leave because after some time, I thought it would be like a 2-hour meeting. It ran for 4 hours. Something after like 3.5, I had already given other appointments and meetings. I left the meeting, but apparently the Honorable Union Finance Minister brought it up again and said, I agree with the Honorable Minister from Tamil Nadu that unanimous is not a requirement for consensus. People can still have differing views. And so this is a system that is shaky. Now I go to the last point, which is that I think it's fixable, but we'll know soon enough, because the way this will break, in my understanding, the way this will break is not with a bang. It will break with a whimper. What if we refuse to come back and implement a law or an amendment to the law in our assembly? Let's say we all agreed it's going to be 5%. What if we come back and pass a law that is 0%? What happens then? Now, do you have different SGSTs? What if we come back and don't pass any amendment to the law at all? What happens then? So this system requires so much cooperation and so much coordination that unless we can fix this, I think we are not got a bright future. There's now a final question, which is this a model that is sustainable irrespective of, let's even say this was perfectly designed GST, and let's even say the union was not taking out this much tax and cess. It is still a problem we have because, as I have pointed out, this is not a parochial concern. If I look at it at a global perspective, India is by far the most centralized country in the world. And that was true before this regime took office in 2014. The constitution was designed to try and create a country where there had been none in the history. For 2000 years, our cultures existed, our people existed, but there had been no country known as India. So in the process of creating that, the constitution vested a whole lot of powers with the union and relatively less with the states. But, at the risk of repetition, I say, in communist China, on one end of the spectrum, the cities have different police departments. The cities issue industrial permits. The counties kind of give environmental clearance. The states issue banking licenses, the provinces. You can't get a China-wide banking license. Standard Chartered Bank has to get a different license in every province. In America, the towns run the school boards. The towns run the police. When I lived in the town of Amherst, we had a different school board in the town of Amherst, a different school board in the village of Williamsville next door. We had different police. We had different policies. There is a Erie County sales tax. There is a Erie County liquor law. It is a county, state, city. This is where regulation and revenue collection resides. India is the only place where it was already one-sided, where everything was in Delhi, and now it's gone much worse after the last 7 years. Ironically, under a prime minister who was the greatest champion of federalism when he was 13 years chief minister. Now, my point is, sooner or later, we will have to find ways to devolve power to the states. Otherwise, we're going to see some serious problems, developing in the next few years.
But PTR, just to quickly ask you, how do you suggest that the union government devolve more power to the states before we go to the next member?
Both indirect and direct taxation and in policy making should be devolved to the states. I mean, there is a clear role for the union. The union is about interstate commerce, about overseas commerce, about foreign relations, about defense, about monetary policy control, about keeping the value of money. All of these things sit with the union. The rest of it, whether the union designs or decides or does anything about it, it still has to be implemented in the states, in the districts, in the cities, in the villages. So trying to have this one-size-fits-all sitting in Delhi, and the CAG report shows it. Every year, there is a failure to spend the money in the Swachh Bharat and the Krishi Kalyan and all these things. Every year, the union fails to achieve its cess, targeted expenditure in every cess. And then they take back 30, 40, 50,000 crores surreptitiously back into the consolidated funds and don't divide it to the states anyway, even on the take back. So, the failure is very obvious. You cannot drive implementation. My best guess is the union government has something like 2 million employees. We are a country of 1.38 billion or something. How do you drive programs with 2 million employees if you're lucky? And that includes the PSUs and all that, right? You have to rely on the states. And so if you're going to have the states do the implementation and the follow-up, like Swachh Bharat, they build the toilets, but there's no water supply because the water supply is a municipal matter. It's not a union government matter. The union government can give you the grant to build the toilet. Then who makes sure there's continuous water supply? That municipality, that village, that township. So this disconnect needs to stop.
Yeah, and the pandemic has actually shown this whole confusion as to what is a state subject, what is a central subject.
We'll take a question from Devi, our member who's waiting. Devi, go ahead.
Yeah, Vanakkam Anna. Very happy to see you and meet you. We are a big fan of you. Okay, I'll put my question in short. Being a tax-paying citizen for years, okay, so would you vouch for similar to the GST state and central? So would it be the state part and the central part? So in my tax, it's always my company's head branch that is in Bengaluru. Okay, so I would be happier to contribute to I contribute to say Chief Minister Relief Fund than the PM CARES. I'd feel happier to contribute to state in my income than equally to the central, maybe.
He's saying why not the state share?
Yeah, I don't know. Let me rephrase the question if you don't mind. Should states have the power for direct taxation? Answer is absolutely yes. Every other country in the world, they do. We are the only country that doesn't. Sooner or later, it has to happen here. And it will. It's an inevitability. There's no way that a state of 80 million people in Tamil Nadu's case or 200 million people in Uttar Pradesh case can run without some form of direct taxation power, and it will happen.
So would you voice for that?
Of course. No, of course.
Did we see you as the future finance minister of India very soon?
Amma, please. I am very happy in the job I have. I never envisioned I'll have this job. This is as high as I want to go in politics. I committed to my wife, just like when I was an expat banker, I committed to my wife, you stay in Chennai and keep the kids here and keep my mother taken care of. Wherever we are in the world, I'll make sure we spend 60% of the nights under the same roof, whether that is a house in New York or Chennai or Madurai or Singapore or elsewhere. I did it for 5 years. I kept a spreadsheet and I did 3 days more than 60% of the nights. Same way I committed to her, I'll come to politics at 50, I'll exit at 60. I have no intention of breaking my word to my wife. I'm very happy to do the job I'm doing. I have no intention to take any other job than this. No ambition, no intention. I'm very happy where I am. Please.
We'll check back with you in 10 years. We'll go to Mr. Ganapati, who's waiting to ask your question.
Good afternoon. Good evening, Mr. Thiagarajan. It's by way of introduction, I'm chairman of Trident Technologies, which is the company that has developed the COVID software for the country. Much maligned at times, much support, much praised at times. And to set the context, we are a global Indian multinational. We are IT vendors for the United Nations. And of course, therefore, being an IT company, for us, the mother country is the United States. The principles, sir, that show sustainable high growth environments, of which you are familiar with in Silicon Valley and Route 128 in Boston, are characterized by 4 important elements that feed on each other to create a virtuous cycle. The existence of leading academic institutions where cutting-edge innovations are born, the presence of a large and mobile, technically competent and talent pool, the availability and easy access to significant amount of risk capital, and of course, the corporate culture of innovation and acquisition, which make these startups flourish. The last of these offer the big wealth creation opportunities that then trigger the other 3 to keep happening again and again. I now speak in my capacity as chairperson of the IIT Madras Entrepreneurs Forum, which is a global virtual forum where almost all of us have been successful entrepreneurs. So I wish to take this opportunity to check with the government of Tamil Nadu, and is this our assessment? The first 2 elements are there, and we should be able to support the government with the third one, that is the risk capital, basis our own involvement in this. And with a little bit of intervention and basis our own experience from 2013 up until now, I can tell you that nothing succeeds like success, having worked with the IIT incubation cells and a few tech startups beyond. Will the government of Tamil Nadu, and before Devi's desire of you becoming Union Finance Minister arrives on the table, would you be willing and able to discuss with us and give us some time where we can present you a roadmap to ensure that Tamil Nadu adopts the Route 128 of Boston and the Silicon Valley, with which many of us are familiar, and we can take it forward?
There's too many questions back. Maybe we can start with the answers.
Yeah, listen, I think part of politics is to be kind of very, what can I say, proper. And so I'm the finance minister. I'm not the industries minister. I'm not the IT minister. I'm not the small scale industries minister. So I am reluctant to go too far beyond my brief. I will just say that both with the CII interaction, plus with SICKI yesterday, plus with my good friend Gopal Srinivasan, I think, who's the head of the
I've been past president of SICKI also, sir.
Yeah, venture capital. So multiple people have made presentations to us or given us soft kind of concepts. I think we are for it. I think we believe that Tamil Nadu has the potential to be very high up on the value chain in terms of innovation in software as a service, in fintech, in kind of, what can I say, new, on the boundary of innovation in IT. But it's not my day job. So I will facilitate as best as I can. There are many people who have come to us with plans. We have discussed some at length. You know, we've been in office about 4 weeks or 5 weeks. So just give us some time. I can assure you that we will pay a lot more attention to it, and that we will, we will tap the Tamil diaspora in the technology industry. I personally, for example, between my MIT classmates and my other US university classmates, and particularly of the Tamil diaspora that I knew when I was in the US, they are all in very, very, very senior positions, maybe in the top 10 or 15 officers at places like Google, at Facebook, at Apple, at Square, at all these companies. So, yeah, when the time is right, we are trying to get over the second wave and get our feet on the ground and understand, my party has not formed the government for 10 years. So there's a lot of things that decay in a 10-year gap. We're still only about a third of the way through even getting the right IAS officers into the right seats. So it's a bit early. It's not my field, but I give you the commitment that were we to have this conversation 3 or 6 months from now, I don't think you'd feel that we had shortchanged anybody in your line of sight.